This is NHK World Japan. We now bring you the news from Radio Japan at 11 hours UTC on Tuesday, June the 25th. I'm Keith McFarlane.
And I'm Eriko Kojima.
In our top stories, the U.S. president is expected to meet his Chinese counterpart on Saturday amid continuing trade friction between the two countries.
A new raft of U.S. sanctions is taking aim at senior Iranian officials, including the country's supreme leader.
And the UN says leaders from more than 140 countries are expected to attend a high-level climate meeting in September. Now, the news in detail. U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to meet his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, on Saturday, amid continuing trade friction between the two countries. Trump will visit Japan from Thursday to attend the G20 summit, which is being held in Osaka on Friday and Saturday. A senior U.S. government official announced the itinerary for President Trump on Monday. It includes meetings with leaders from 8 countries, among them Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Trump's meeting with Xi, scheduled for Saturday, has prompted speculation as to whether the two leaders can achieve a breakthrough in resolving trade conflict. Trump and Xi are also expected to discuss deadlocked denuclearization talks between Washington and Pyongyang, after the Chinese president met with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un last week. The U.S. president is also expected to exchange views with each leader over rising military tensions with Iran. Trump is considering a visit to the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas during his trip to South Korea this weekend. The U.S. official added that a meeting with Kim is not currently planned.
The U.S. Special Envoy for North Korea will visit Seoul this week ahead of President Trump's arrival. The U.S. State Department announced that Stephen Biegun will visit the city from Thursday to Sunday in order to meet with South Korean officials. Trump is scheduled to fly into Seoul on Saturday before meeting with President Moon Jae-in the following day. His visit will take place after he attends the summit of the Group of 20 Nations in the Japanese city of Osaka. Biegun and South Korean officials are expected to discuss how to respond to North Korea before the two presidents meet. North Korea's state-run media earlier reported that the country's leader Kim Jong-un had received a personal letter from Trump. The report said Kim would seriously contemplate the interesting content. The report raised hopes for the resumption of stalled U.S.-North Korea talks with the goal of denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. Biegun said in a lecture in Washington last week that the U.S. and North Korea understand a flexible approach is needed to push the talks forward. Some U.S. diplomatic sources say Biegun is also exploring the possibility of meeting senior North Korean officials.
A new raft of U.S. sanctions is taking aim at senior Iranian officials, including the country's supreme leader. U.S. President Donald Trump says Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is ultimately responsible for what he called Iran's hostile conduct. Trump made the following comment: "Sanctions imposed through the executive order that I'm about to sign will deny the Supreme Leader and the Supreme Leader's office and those closely affiliated with him and the office access to key financial resources and support." The U.S. Treasury Secretary says the new order will lock up billions of additional dollars in Iranian assets and further squeeze the country. It's already facing a number of U.S. sanctions. The move further escalates tension between the countries. Iran's foreign minister responded via Twitter. In a reference to Trump's top aides, he wrote that they despise diplomacy and thirst for war.
Iran has harshly condemned additional U.S. sanctions, saying the action has ruled out a diplomatic solution between the two countries. Foreign Ministry spokesman Saeed Abbas Mousavi tweeted on Tuesday that imposing useless sanctions on Iran's supreme leader and his foreign minister means the path of diplomacy has closed permanently. He also wrote that Trump's desperate administration is destroying the established international mechanisms for maintaining world peace and security.
Members of the UN Security Council have agreed to call on the United States and Iran to hold talks to ease tensions. The Council held an emergency closed-door session in New York on Monday at the request of the United States. Iran, which is not a member of the Security Council, did not take part. Participants discussed recent tanker ship attacks near the Strait of Hormuz and Iran's downing of a U.S. surveillance drone last week. Kuwait's UN ambassador Mansour al-Otaibi, who chaired the meeting, later read out an informal statement that called for dialogue. He said the Security Council agreed to urge the parties concerned to exercise maximum restraint and take steps and action to de-escalate and end tensions.
You're listening to Radio Japan of the NHK World Japan Network. The U.S. administration is launching the first stage of its Middle East peace plan at an economic conference in Bahrain that starts on Tuesday. Representatives from several Arab states and financial institutions are expected to attend the two-day meeting. The Trump administration will present its economic aid plan and call for cooperation to attract $50 billion in investment for the Palestinians and neighboring countries over a period of 10 years. But relations with the Palestinians worsened after the United States recognized Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. The U.S. has since pressured the Palestinians by suspending all economic aid. By presenting a major economic aid plan, the American administration apparently aims to make the Palestinians respond to its peace deal. The Palestinians are boycotting the meeting, criticizing the U.S. for trying to solve the issue with money. Due to the Palestinian boycott, the Israeli government has not been invited to the meeting.
The United Nations says leaders from more than 140 countries are expected to attend a high-level climate meeting in September. The UN Secretary-General's Special Envoy for the 2019 Climate Action Summit, Luis Alfonso de Alba, made the announcement at a news conference on Monday. The Special Envoy said that he expects more than 140 heads of state and government to take part in the gathering at UN headquarters in New York. He said that U.S. President Donald Trump, who is widely viewed as backpedaling on climate change, is not currently expected to attend the meeting. De Alba also said that unlike previous meetings, this year's high-level climate gathering will run for 3 consecutive days. He warned that the average global temperature will be about 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial revolution levels as soon as 2030. He said that what countries are committed to in the 2015 Paris Agreement is not enough. He stressed the need to implement measures that can bring about drastic change.
Shareholders of the Japanese automaker Nissan approved plans for a management shakeup put forward by the firm's executives at an annual general meeting in Yokohama on Tuesday. President Hiroto Saikawa offered an apology for a recent scandal involving former chairman Carlos Ghosn, who has been charged with financial misconduct by Japanese prosecutors. More than 2,800 shareholders attended the meeting, during which Saikawa expressed a negative view on the possibility of a merger with Renault. The French automaker, or rather French carmaker, holds a large stake in Nissan. Saikawa said he was willing to discuss extending the two automakers' alliance, something about which he has expressed hesitancy in the past. Renault chairman Jean-Dominique Senard was in attendance in his role as a member of the Nissan board. Responding to a shareholder's question, Senard said he had no intention of aggressively pursuing the merger. The meeting lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. Shareholders approved the appointment of 11 board members and the adoption of a new governance structure. This marks a fresh start for Nissan, where authority was concentrated in the hands of Ghosn. But Nissan still faces the challenge of restoring ties with Renault after 6 months of confrontation.
The Japanese government will provide subsidies to the nation's 4 telecommunications companies to build next-generation 5G mobile networks across the country. NTT Docomo, KDDI, SoftBank, and Rakuten were allocated frequencies by the Communications Ministry for the ultra-high-speed services in April. They have submitted plans to the government to build a total of 70,000 base stations across Japan by March of 2025. The ministry wants the mobile operators to set up 84,000 stations, which is 20% more than their original plan. To speed up the process of building base stations, the ministry plans to lay out a new subsidiary system in the fiscal 2020 budget. The G5 networks are expected to be used in a broad range of services, including remote medical treatment and self-driving car systems.
China has called on African nations to strengthen their ties with the country under its Belt and Road Initiative and to oppose any form of unilateralism or protectionism. At last year's Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, President Xi Jinping pledged $60 billion to help build infrastructure and develop industries on the continent. The Chinese government held a meeting of ministers and officials of African nations in Beijing on Tuesday to follow up on last year's agreements. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said China and Africa should strengthen market growth to share opportunities and use their rich natural resources for national development. Wang said China and African nations should clearly oppose any form of unilateralism and promote an open trade policy. An NHK correspondent in Beijing says China is apparently aiming to apply pressure on the U.S. ahead of this weekend's G20 summit in Osaka.
The International Olympic Committee has reportedly signed a record $3 billion sponsorship deal with soft drink giant Coca-Cola and China's Mengniu Dairy Company. The deal will start in 2021 and cover 6 summer and winter games. The mega partnership comes at a time of strained U.S.-China relations, but no signs of tension were on display as CEOs inked the agreement alongside IOC President Thomas Bach. The two companies will have their own marketing plans, but will collaborate on projects. While the deal is good news for the IOC's stated goal of expanding sponsorships outside of the U.S. and Europe, it also represents a chance for Mengniu to grow its overseas market. The company currently dominates the Asian market as the second largest dairy group in the region. It is the first Chinese consumer goods company to join the highest tier of Olympic sponsors.
An umbrella group of the world's central banks is warning of risks that could arise from large technology firms providing financial services. The Bank for International Settlements, or BIS, says the IT companies could become dominant through the advantages provided by their platforms. An annual report from BIS warns that some customers could find themselves denied financial services if their big tech service providers conduct excessive analyses of their personal data. The BIS also says regulators need to ensure a level playing field between the tech firms and financial institutions. It says coordination and rules among authorities are crucial at both the national and the international levels. Facebook announced plans last week to launch Libra, a global cryptocurrency. Customers of Google and Amazon and China's Alibaba are already using payment services set up by each firm respectively. The report also acknowledges that the company's low-cost business models offer advantages, including the ability to provide services in areas lacking access to banks and simplified international money transfers.
A major Japanese talent agency has suspended 11 of its comedians for attending a party hosted by a crime group and accepting payment for their participation. Yoshimoto Kogyo announced the disciplinary measure on Monday. The 11 include Hiroyuki Miyasako and Ryo Tamura, both of whom appear on various TV shows. The Osaka-based agency says the comedians attended a year-end party in 2014 that was hosted by a group linked to money transfer fraud. The agency was not informed of their attendance. The 11 had been invited through a fellow comedian, Shinya Irie. Yoshimoto Kogyo terminated its contract with him last week. The comedians will be barred from appearing on stage or TV indefinitely. Finally, in our story about next-generation mobile networks, we referred to G5 mobile networks. It should have been 5G. Apologies for any confusion. And that was the news from Radio Japan of the NHK World Japan Network. I'm Keith McFarlane.
And I'm Mariko Kojima.
You can also find the latest news in English on our website at nhk.jp/rj.